Are there any examples of scientific evidence that would support a biblical worldview?
Oh, numerous, almost too many to count. Absolutely.
So what are some of the best evidences, or maybe even some of your favorite ones that you use when you're speaking in churches?
Well, Dawn, one that really makes a lot of impact on people, and I don't know if you've heard this, but it's mind-blowing, and that is that Dr. Mary Schweitzer, at the time at Montana State University, serving under the great Jack Horner, the one that we were just talking about earlier, the #1 dinosaur paleontologist in the world. And what she discovered was inside dinosaur bones, specifically the femur of a T-Rex, she found red blood cells. Now, think about that for a moment. One of the things she said it was totally shocking. I didn't believe it until we'd done it 17 times. But you see, it even got more exciting because they dissolved the bony matrix and they found unfossilized fibrous tissue that was flexible and resilient, could be stretched and returned to its original shape. And she couldn't believe it. And you know what? I don't blame her. Because sometimes our worldview, our faith in what we believe, it's hard to let go. But I think a more apt interpretation of this evidence is that the dinosaur bones are not 65 million years old. Because how could that stretchy material last that long?
Now, you just talked about how we hear that dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago, and millions of years is a concept that we hear a lot about. But where did that idea of millions of years come from?
Well, typically we find that mostly in the late 1700s and really the early 1800s, more or less new science called geology was interpreting those sedimentary layers to have taken millions of years. They would look and see how these layers were laid down very slowly in the present, and they would postulate that if it happens slowly now, then it always happened slowly in the past. However, there are better explanations in geology that would explain that. For example, we have what's called polystrate fossils. Now, poly meaning many, and strate or strata would be those sedimentary layers. So a polystrate fossil is usually a tree that's been fossilized and turned to stone that in many cases goes through millions of years of layers. Now, Dawn, think about this. Will a tree sit there for millions of years to be slowly buried? Does that make any sense?
No, they rot.
Yeah, it's going to decompose. Again, a better interpretation of those facts is that that tree was buried in a cataclysmic event where those layers were laid down quickly, and the Bible gives us an idea of that, the worldwide flood. And on top of that, some of these sedimentary layers actually end up being bent. So we have rock layers around the world where they will go up at an angle and even sometimes turn back on themselves. And rock doesn't bend, does it?
No, it doesn't.
No, so that indicates that those layers were at one time soft, and then maybe through seismic uplift, that's what bent those layers. Again, the physical evidence supports the historical account of the Bible. That worldview guides us, but it's also consistent with physical evidence we have in the world today.
Well, speaking about evidence, we often hear put forth as fact again, carbon dating, that we can date something and it dates and proves it's millions of years old. So is there a fallacy in that thinking?
I wouldn't say that there's a fallacy in the actual operational science, because in the present, those kind of radioisotope dating methods, all we're doing is measuring elements in the present. And by the way, carbon dating, which you mentioned, can't give us long ages. What we're talking about when we're talking about millions of years is other radioisotopes, like for instance, using the potassium-argon dating method. In fact, it was interesting. I often like to share about how a rock was taken from a volcanic lava dome, sent into a potassium-argon dating lab, and they got an age of 350,000 years. Yet, a sample, a particular element was taken from that same sample and sent into the potassium-argon dating lab, and this time they got an age of 900,000. And yet another element was extracted from that sample, and this time it was up to 2.8 million years. Now, Dawn, that was the same sample, taken from the same volcanic lava dome, sent to the same potassium-argon dating lab using the same mass spectrometer and the same scientist, but they had dates that ranged from 350,000 to 2.8 million years. So which one do you think might be right?
It's hard to know when we get such a range. So any idea how they misinterpret, if you will, that dating?
It's not really a misinterpretation as much as it is that they did get different answers. And it's interesting to know that this sample, actually, the rock was formed only 10 years before. So they missed it by quite a way. 10 years instead of up to 2.8 million. So how do we get radioisotope dates? I like to refer to a little analogy, if you don't mind. Let's say that you go home today and you hear water running in your home. And you open the door expecting there to be water flooded in your home. But lo and behold, everything's dry. But upstairs in your bathroom, the tub is going full force. And like most people, you have a 1-gallon pail sitting in your bathroom. And in this case, you hold that 1-gallon pail underneath the faucet and you time it. It takes 60 seconds, exactly 1 minute, to fill up that 1-gallon pail. Now later, you measure the amount of water in the bathtub and you find that there are 15 gallons in the tub. And it's dispensing at 1 gallon per minute. So tell me, how long did it take to put that water in the bathtub?
Well, the initial thought is 15 minutes.
Right, and that's a very logical thing. However, we have to make assumptions to come up with that calculation. Let me explain some of those. We assumed that the amount of water coming out of the tub faucet never changed, never varied. Nobody was turning it on or off. We assumed that the drain plug in the tub was never lifted up and drained some water out or closed. We assumed that the tub started out with 0 water and that 1-gallon pail never added some water or took some out. You see, these are very similar to the exact assumptions that scientists use when they're using radioisotope dating. And we now know from some scientific studies that some of those assumptions were wrong, and experimentally, as in the case that I just mentioned where we have a 10-year-old rock dating very late. And by the way, those experiments like that have been repeated dozens of times, but it brings into question the assumptions they use and the dates that they get from those as well.
So if someone wanted to go a little bit further and maybe even equip themselves, as you said, where would you suggest that they go?
Well, I would say one very good resource would be Evolution's Achilles Heels. Now, this is a video that actually features 15 PhD scientists from all different kinds of fields. And they're actually addressing the very foundations of evolution and showing how those things can't be true. In fact, it won 2nd place at the Christian Worldview Film Festival. In fact, I think it's the best thing that Creation Ministries International has done in our 45 years of existence. So I would suggest that they get their hands on this documentary and just give it a shot and see if that might help them understand how operational science actually supports the historical account of the Bible.
This is such an important resource that Creation Ministries International wants to make it available when you click the link below for a free 7-day streaming opportunity. Thanks so much, Scott, for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, and I encourage all Christians to get equipped with a defense for their faith and to understand that operational science supports the historical account of the Bible.